Ann Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show. Our guest tonight is Dean Ferrucci. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you.
Dean is a nursery specialist. Dean's family, who owns the Los Altos Nursery located on Hawthorne Avenue, has been active in the nursery business longer than Los Altos has been incorporated as a city. In fact, the family just celebrated their 50th anniversary in the nursery business. Congratulations to you, Dean, and to all of your family on a wonderful accomplishment. Now, I understand that you are a third-generation Los Alton, and that your grandfather, Tomoko, who later modernized his name to Frank, emigrated to the United States. What can you tell me about your grandfather, Frank?
He came here around the time of the earthquake, a little after, and
1906.
Right, and he was looking for wealth in America. He had heard there's a lot of work here, primarily in the railroads, and so he left Japan, and actually he left his family there of 4 children and his wife, and came here to work in the railroads and found very little work since it was predominantly Chinese. So he ended up sharecropping around the valley, going from place to place and building up a little bit of cash, and eventually he brought his wife and family over, and I believe it was 1914, and
so his wife and family stayed back in Japan for
yes.
8 years, didn't they?
Right.
So that was a hardship on the family, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
When she came over, she decided she didn't like the nomadic lifestyle of traveling around, so she wanted to settle down, and she really liked Los Altos. So that prompted him to purchase some property, 5 acres in now residential section, Los Altos. And
is it still zoned as an agricultural?
yes, it is.
That's interesting, because you've continued at farming it or leasing it in some way
right.
for the garden business. That's interesting. Right. So now I understand that your grandfather actually didn't own the land. He had.
Actually, it was put in the children's name because he was a Japanese immigrant, so he wasn't allowed to have property. So they held the land. Okay,
so his son actually, Frank, I guess it was,
right.
his son Frank, held the land, and that's how it sort of continued down to this day.
Right.
So were there any other Japanese families in the area at the time?
Actually, I believe there were quite a few, and they congregated near this property because there was a Japanese school on the land, and it was where my folks have their house now.
Is that right? And what street is that?
On Valley Street.
Valley Street?
Right.
And so there was a Japanese school. Now, did your father, for example, go to that school?
I think all of my relatives did. It was a fun place for them at the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there were several Japanese families who emigrated to this area, primarily because there was agricultural work to be done, and they were farmers in Japan, and so this was a natural fit for them, or they just did any job that was available to them?
I think they did any job. Yeah, they were doctors and everything. A lot of relatives that came here, but that's what they ended up doing, growing flowers and starting nurseries and farming the land.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Now, your grandfather bought the piece of property in like 1917 or 18, and your nursery didn't really start until the late 40s. How did the family actually make a living in those years between 1918 and 1947?
I believe it started as a prune orchard, but my father said they quickly converted it to berries. That's apparently what they knew how to grow best, strawberries and raspberries, because it was a high cash crop. So they made a fairly good living doing that. Also sharecropping land near Moffett Field. had quite a few acres there
So
also.
would they also grow berries there, or did they grow other
It
plants?
was primarily strawberries, but they also grew tomatoes and a few vegetables, probably for their own subsistence also.
That's interesting. I know several years ago we had a showing of Anna Knapp Fitz's paintings over at Hillview School, and she has a painting of the strawberry fields in Los Altos, and I wonder if perhaps it was your grandfather's strawberry field. That would be interesting to know that. But there may have been other Japanese families that lived in the area.
Yeah, I think so.
As well. And this area at that time was really known as the Valley of Heart's Delight. It was primarily agricultural, lots of orchards. People made their living here. And it was kind of an idyllic time in the history of Los Altos. In fact, a lot of people think it came to its crowning glory in that period of time. But that all changed, didn't it? And how did it change, Dean?
When the war started in 1942, after Pearl Harbor, my folks were relocated to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and that was a radical change in their lives.
And there was a lot of prejudice against Japanese Americans.
Yes.
Because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, I imagine. And,
definitely. Quite a few people tried to purchase the land out from under our family for $600 or so. And
isn't that ridiculous? What an insult.
right.
And tried to buy some of your equipment too, I bet.
Oh, definitely. Tractors for $50 and plows and a lot of things that were essential to the family.
But your family refused to sell. Where did that strength come from, I wonder?
Actually, from the friends in Los Altos. We had quite a few, and one of them was a prominent attorney, Paul Myers. He stepped in and held the land for the family through the war years and made sure that it was in good hands. So we were very fortunate to have him.
Oh, that's wonderful. So your land, I mean, your family had to leave to go to Wyoming, but you went knowing that at some point in time you would be able to come back and the land would still be yours.
Right.
That's interesting. Now, what has your family shared with you about that experience in that camp? It must have been just horrifying.
I think they made the best of it, though. My mom, she said the winters were brutal there, so she doesn't even like to go to Tahoe for the winter because it was so cold, and that's all she can remember. And my dad, he doesn't have a lot of memories about it. He, I guess, was young enough where it was just another adventure in his life, and from there he went to the war, so he didn't spend that much time there.
Yeah, and I understand that some of your family has served in the armed forces, and then you had. Now, were they serving in the armed forces at the same time that other members were in camp?
Yes, they were. My mom was
That's
in
ironic, isn't
camp also, and she was building camouflage nets and all kinds of things for the Army, while my dad was in Europe, in Italy, actually.
And he was with the
442nd.
Which is a very famous company, I know.
Right.
In fact, you said there was a movie made about that company.
Right. Actually, he served with quite a few Senator Inoue from Hawaii and a congressman were in his E-Company unit. So he's really proud of that. He's always told us stories about going to Italy and help liberating it and landing in Normandy.
So your family really did not have any affiliation with the Japanese at all. I mean, you considered yourself Americans.
Yeah, they went to great lengths to try to make us feel like we were strictly American, and it was interesting. I wish I'd learned Japanese, actually. They kind of kept that away from us, but...
Is that right? So you don't actually know how to speak Japanese?
No, and my parents, neither of them have even been to Japan, so I felt like it was part of my heritage, but until I actually went there, I didn't really understand.
Didn't understand. That's really interesting. So eventually, I know that some of the other parts of some of the family was back in the Midwest in Detroit, and then after the war, some of them migrated back here to the West.
Right. Actually, half of the family that had come from Japan returned, and my Uncle Tom and Auntie Helen and Uncle Frank joined my father in starting up the nursery. And
so what was your father's background that he felt comfortable starting a nursery business?
Actually, it was the changes in Los Altos that he had seen, and Uncle Tom also, and they just thought that that was a direction instead of farming that they wanted to go.
So the changes were that after the war there was a lot more opportunity for employment here in the valley, and the land was being subdivided again.
Right, just the influx of people.
And so we got these huge, housing tracts coming in, and if you have housing tracts, you need bedding plants and landscape design. Is that correct?
Right.
So your family saw an opportunity and you capitalized on that.
Right, and actually my dad wanted to make use of his GI loan too to go to college, so he entered Davis and then finished up at Cal Poly.
So he actually had the idea of getting into the nursery business before he went to school then? Or did they
I'm
go
not sure
hand in hand?
exactly what he knew what he was doing when he entered Davis, but by the time he had left Cal Poly, that was pretty much the goal that he and Uncle Tom had in mind. So they just took it from there.
So what were some of the early experiences at the nursery? I mean, did you have a full range of plants like you have now, or did you start with just a few?
They started from scratch. I believe it was just bedding plants, and they tried to propagate a lot of their own fuchsias and geraniums and that type of thing, and try to find out what each person's niche was in the nursery. So it was kind of an interesting startup because they were all so diverse. My Uncle Frank came from a...
So each one of the family who did decide to work in the nursery had their own particular job?
Right. My Auntie Helen was a bookkeeper, so she took over all of that. And my Uncle Frank came from a grocery store background, so he did a lot of the dry good buying and merchandising. And my dad was the person with the horticultural background, so he actually got my cousin Uncle Ben to go to Cal Poly, and he studied landscaping. So
it was truly a family business.
Right.
That's really interesting, and they continued, and the business grew and thrived in Los Altos, and it still thrives under you and your brother, I understand. So. And I understand, you were not just, the family were not just business proprietors, that your father and your Uncle Frank were very active in Los Altos.
Right, in the Lions Club and Palo Club.
Palo Club, and I know that your Uncle Frank was awarded the Realtors Community Services Award in the late 70s. As the volunteer of the year. So that's a very high honor in Los Altos. And I think your father also was quite active too, and as you said, in other organizations, and sponsored lots of teams over the years.
Right, softball and Little League teams. We had American and National League teams. So.
Yeah, that's marvelous. Now, one gift that your family gave to Los Altos, which we still enjoy today, I think we have to mention. And I know you know what I'm talking about, but tell us about that gift. I think it's...
It was before my time, but it was the pistache trees that line downtown Los Altos. Nursery donated those way back when.
Well, isn't that marvelous? And there's such a compelling part of Los Altos. I think it's what really makes this village so unique, especially in the fall when the trees are that brilliant red, yellow. They just come alive. They look like they're on fire. So I think Los Altos has a lot to thank your family for. Well, it's just been delightful, Dean, talking with you tonight about your family, an important family to Los Altos.
Thank you.
Starting with your grandfather and grandfather, and coming through the generations to you and your brother who run the nursery, and several other members who I know live here in the Los Altos area. So we thank you. I thank you as a Los Alton for those beautiful trees that I enjoy every fall, and I hope that your family will be able to celebrate their 100th anniversary in the nursery business in Los Altos. So we're going to be, we're planning to actually visit Dean at the Los Altos Nursery in the next week or so, and hopefully we're going to be able to get some of the older members of Dean's family to share their insights into the nursery business as well as see the nursery, which has become a Los Altos tradition. So thanks for watching the History Show, and stay tuned for our coverage of Dean and the Los Altos Nursery. And thanks for watching. We'll see you the next time. Let's roll that tape now.
Thanks for having me.
That's good. Thank you, Dean. Hi, Dean.
Hi, Nan.
I guess we're in the middle of this nursery that you've talked so proudly about. And I know there's some people here that you'd love to introduce me to.
Yes, I would. This is my mom, Rosie.
Hi, Rosie.
How do you do,
Glad
Nan?
to meet you.
And my dad, George.
Hi, George. Glad to meet you.
And my niece, Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Say hi.
How old are you?
5.5.
5.5. And you're fourth generation,
Yeah.
correct?
Right.
Next
Okay.
generation.
That's wonderful.
Future.
Well, thanks for introducing us,
Sure.
Dean. I know that Rosie has a couple of things that she'd like to share with us this afternoon, and it's such a beautiful day here in the nursery, and we kind of have a secluded spot, at least for a while, I think. So anyway, what were your I know that you told me before that you were born in Santa Clara County in Campbell, and you were born actually here in Los Altos. Is that correct,
Right here.
George? Right here in Los Altos. So you're a native Los Altos, and that's fabulous. We talked a little bit about the fact that you were born on a farm, and George was, in a sense, born on a farm because this was all
Right.
orchard area, wasn't it?
True. It was.
What kind of trees were here? Do you remember?
I think George mentioned that they had prune trees. And was there anything else besides prunes originally?
No.
Oh, it was strictly a prune orchard.
Prunes.
Like the rest of Santa Clara Valley.
Uh-huh.
So,
And Jean was sharing with us that actually there were prunes on the property originally, and you cleared them and then planted other
Yes.
fruits.
They had strawberries and raspberries, and also they planted some peach trees, which
Oh,
was
peaches.
yes, the Shanghai, those huge white,
Oh,
delicious,
those
yes,
wonderful white ones?
Right.
Oh, I love those.
That's
Now, in terms of what I think our viewers would kind of like to get a feeling for is how were you evacuated during the war? I mean, give us the process, and maybe share with us some of your feelings about leaving the land that you farmed, because it must have been very, very difficult.
Well, it was war was started in December 7th of 1941, and then we were given orders to evacuate. We were given just a short time, and finally in May we were evacuated to Santa Anita, which was a assembly center, and during that time we were there for several months while they were building barracks and accommodations for a relocation center inland, like in Hart Mountain, Wyoming, is where we were sent. and others were sent, 120,000 people were sent to various relocation centers. And Georgia also, being from Mountain View, Santa Clara County mostly was sent to Heart Mountain. But after he stayed in camp for...
Is that Montana or Wyoming?
In Wyoming.
Wyoming.
Uh-huh.
Okay, right, Wyoming. Uh-huh.
And that is, my goodness, I mean, coming from California, we weren't equipped with our clothing and all. I mean, we had absolutely no winter clothing in the winters.
And it gets really, really
it
cold
goes 10,
there.
30 degrees below zero.
Yes.
And so we had to order through the catalogs, which was quite an experience. And we were given an allowance of $3 and so many cents, and with that we were supposed to supply ourselves with our
$3.50 a month or a week?
No, a month.
A month. Oh.
Plus, you'll be interested to know that when we worked, the professionals got, I think, $18, and I worked as a secretary, and I was paid $16 a month. Can you believe that?
Unbelievable. I mean, it wasn't anyway.
Right.
There, you just survived then.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So what? When you did get back, and I understand that you decided to go into the nursery business. There was a combination of factors coming into play. I mean, it was post-war. There was a lot of people moving to California. A lot of need for housing, and there was some housing being built here, so people had need for plants and landscaping. Why did you make that transition from farming the land to actually building a nursery? You know, because that was a huge transition. I mean, one was more or less an agricultural business, and the other a retail business. What propelled you to make that decision, George or Rose?
Yes.
Well, I think the area itself needed a nursery, so I went to school and got back, and all of us was together build a nursery.
So there wasn't really any nursery here then, and so that you provided a need.
Yeah.
You know, which is always the sign of a good entrepreneur.
Yes, right.
And now I understand from Dean that he and Daryl are now running the nursery.
Right.
So he was proudly sharing with us that he's very happy to be able to continue this business now in the third generation of your family, which must give you a lot of pride.
Yes. That was our prime goal. They went to Cal Poly and got all the background and education, so they wanted to continue, and so we were happy for them that they were interested in continuing, and we want to keep this tradition going.
Here we are in your beautiful nursery, and it looks like we're standing in the shade area and sort of on the border of your summer annuals and perennials. What are some of the plants that you have in this shade area?
Well, right now we've got rhododendrons in full bloom and a couple of aisles here of hanging color that goes in sun and shade.
They're absolutely gorgeous.
Yes, they are.
And this sea of color that we see out here is just absolutely breathtaking.
Right. We're right in the middle of our perennial season, so we've got a lot of different things right now.
Now, I noticed in the background, Dean, that there's a greenhouse. And do you use the greenhouse now for any bedding?
Actually, it's a propagation house, but right now we're just using it to hold all of our color and try to get things into full bloom. And in the wintertime, we use it to protect our bougainvilleas and hibiscus and that type of thing.
Now, did you seed at one time in the nursery?
Yes, my father did all the propagation for bedding plants and fuchsias and things like that, but the industry's changed a little bit, and all the growers are doing such a good job, we're letting them do it.
Dean, I noticed, you know, beside the besides the greenhouse, there's also a tank house on the property. What's the story on the tank house? I know they were very prevalent at the turn of the century and, throughout the agricultural years in Los Altos.
Right. I imagine when my grandfather was farming this land, that was the primary source of water for all of the berries and everything that he had here. So we're now hooked up to the city water, but it still has water in it flowing from underground.
So there's a well there?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's still active. We just have a cap on it at the moment.
Uh-huh. Dean, I guess this is the barn.
This is it. It's at least 100 years old, and you can see the horse stalls there, and that's where everything started. We use it for storage now predominantly.
Just storage for the nursery or just family storage?
Both, half and half.
Now I noticed this truck on the property too, and that looks like it has some years on it.
Yeah, I think that's an original truck from when the nursery first started, and we used it for hauling bedding plants, I imagine.
Dean, I know that when your mother and I talked and your dad and you talked to them, you found out a piece of information that that has sort of come to light.
Right.
And I thought maybe you want to share that with our viewers.
I was told that during the internship during World War II that the land was actually held by an Italian family that was here locally.
And I think we said it was Mr. Myers, but that was incorrect. Okay,
right.
So it was an Italian family, and they're not really quite sure of the name.
Right, and also the land was being lived on at the time by a Mexican lady named Agapita, whom we later hired when the nursery started.
Okay.
So,
well, thanks for sharing that,
Sure.
and that kind of clears up some issues for you, and I'm happy for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean.